for a second. Yay! Hey Tabitha, my friend. Hey Sean. Sorry, I'm distracted by something cute on the floor. Let me move that just a little bit. Okay, might be easier. Hope everyone's having a great day. And I'm going to show you what I'm laughing at. This little sweet baby. She's playing and hopping around. So, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. So, tonight we are talking about courage for big girls facing conflict. And this is, we've said it, I think we've said it one of the weeks, but basically the theme here is let's be prepared. Let's be ready before we get into something. Conflict, and then next week is crisis. And the biggest thing is a lot of these situations that we're talking about, you can handle it better if you know how to handle it before you get there. And that's just in general in life. I mean, if you are prepared for something, you're going to be able to handle it a lot easier than if it just kind of blindsides you, or if it, comes at you and you don't know, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know if you're not prepared, and mentally, spiritually, if you're not prepared for it, things can throw you kind of off. But if you are ready, regardless of what comes, then you're going to do a lot better, and you're going to probably get through things faster. So, and she says that, she starts off the chapter by saying that conflict is like the flu. No one wants to go through it, but everyone needs to be prepared just in case. And that's true. Everyone, you always, it's not going to be me. This isn't going to happen to me. That's not going to happen to me. But when something happens, if you just kind of ignored the fact that it might, then you're not ready, and it makes things a lot worse. I experienced that specifically this year. I've never had the flu before this year, but I actually had the flu. Tommy and I had it at the same time. And, of course, we weren't prepared for it, and we needed help because we could not move. We could not do much of anything. Anyway, that's just free information, I guess. So, talking about conflict, it says that walking through conflict isn't something you can just choose to do well. You have to learn to do it well. And she points out, too, that a lot of times our coping mechanisms, or just how we deal with life in general, but specifically with conflict, can have a lot to do with how it has been, not mirrored, but basically what we've seen growing up, what we've modeled, that's the word I was looking for, how it's been modeled to us in our homes growing up. And it says conflict is a part of life from time to time, but how it's resolved in your home has a lot of influence on how your conflict resolution skills are developed. And so I guess kind of remember that too if you have kids. We always say that kids are watching, and they learn more from watching us than they do listening to us. But this is one of those things, don't only fix it for yourself, but fix it for the people and the little people in your house that are watching you, because you don't want them to go through the how to do it wrong part and then have to fix it like we are sometimes. She was living. I just missed a whole story. Oh. She's talking about at her wedding, I think it was hers, as opposed to a story about someone. No, it's a friend of hers that basically there was just family drama, and the stepmom decided to wear a dress that was basically identical to what the mom was wearing. It's a big, huge thing. No one wanted to, or other people tried to address it, and the stepmom didn't care. And so the bride really kind of needed to address it, and she didn't. But then it basically came down to, instead of confronting it, instead of dealing with it, she says, I pouted and whined to others rather than confronting the stepmom about it. It says, if you find that conflict is extremely hard to face, or if you find yourself in conflict more times than you would like to mention, it could be that your skills are faulty. That's the bad news. The good news is you're not alone, nor is your deficit permanent. You can keep growing and learning. And that's kind of what I'm hoping you get that feel through this whole book is, you're not alone and it's not over. Let's work wherever we are. Let's just work on it and get better. So, she starts off with some ways not to handle conflict. And a lot of times I think it's a good idea. And, before we jump into this is how you do it, let's talk about how not to, so that maybe you can realize, if you recognize yourself in one of these things, you might recognize this as how not to. Because you may think you have a really good way of dealing with it, but it's probably not working if it's one of these. So the first one is ignoring conflict, hoping that it will go away. And that one's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, just because you ignore something doesn't mean it's going to go away, especially if it's something significant. You do need to make sure that it really is a conflict. Don't think every little disagreement or every little thing that you think is conflict. Make sure it's really conflict. Don't make things into conflict that don't start out conflict just because you think you have to address everything and fix everything. There is a scripture that says it's to a man's glory to overlook, I think it's further in here, not overlook conflict, but basically, if it's not a big deal, let it go, is my paraphrase. That's Stacy's translation of the scripture. But she also points out that if ignoring and hoping it will go away is your way of dealing with it, chances are you're going to face the same situations over and over again because things are not going to get resolved. So ignoring it and hoping it will go away doesn't usually work. The next thing is pouting about it, hoping that someone will notice. And this is the one that I guess bothers me. And in my stubbornness, when I see someone doing this, I don't acknowledge it at all because I don't want them to get the attention that they're wanting because it's not the right kind of attention. And I actually had a friend that I've kind of reconnected with today, and I told her, if someone really wants help, I'm dig in both feet, let's go, let's do this. But if someone just wants attention and doesn't really want to change, but wants to just, continue to have this be their identity and see what they can get out of you and get the ahs and the I'm so sorries, and there's a time for that, but if that's all you're wanting, I'm not good about hanging in there with you because there's someone else that really wants to do something about it. So if you're one that pouts, hoping that someone will notice, that's not a healthy way. It says, when someone pouts, she might as well scream. She brings attention into the room and forces others to tiptoe around the problem. It's hostage taking. And I thought that was a good description. I'd never really thought of it that way. But that's what you're doing. You're causing everyone to, if you're that person that pouts and you're in the room with other people, you're causing them to feel uncomfortable and to, it changes how they communicate with each other. It changes what they're allowed to talk about. And you just kind of bring a room down in general. It says they will learn to, other people will learn to ignore them like they ignore the one that cries wolf. They will refuse to stick around and listen to the silent screaming. This is a big girl, what she will do. And will leave the pouter alone with her anger until she's ready to engage, which is basically what I was saying. When you're ready for help, let's do this. Let's get help. But if all you're doing is looking for attention, all you're doing is hurting the other people in the room. So the third way is fussing about unrelated issues. And this is, that whole passive-aggressive thing where, you have something that's bothering you, but instead of dealing with it, you fuss about everything else. You find other flaws and you find other things to point out when all you're doing is talking in circles about the thing that really matters. And if you would spend time fixing the thing that really matters, you wouldn't have, these other things probably wouldn't bother you anyway. So, it says big girls know that there's something under the surface that is causing the trouble and are willing to look for it in order to deal with it. The next thing is exploding in anger. And that's probably the worst way to deal with conflict, is just to get mad. And, the reason people use anger is because anger works. It commands everyone's attention. Anger works because it works. People who are within earshot usually become submissive if the outburst is loud or long enough. Gaining someone's submission does not resolve the conflict. It's just that all that is doing is more hostage taking, just like the last one that we talked about. It says, big girls don't need rage. They use words that are clear and precise. If they... I have sound effects tonight. Tommy's were gunshots last night. Mine is barking dogs. Or a barking dog. Anyway, back to the conflict. It says, if they want someone's attention, they simply seize the moment and say, hey, can I talk to you? And that's the best thing to do. So the wrong way is to just blow up and get mad, and you don't resolve conflict by getting mad. You resolve conflict through conversation. And, with pure motives. If you're not in there to be right, you're in there to fix something. Let's see. It says, big girls are not interested in punishment or retribution, no matter how desperate the situation. They have a heart for resolution. And that's the difference. When you go in to resolve conflict, you're not going to prove that you're right. You're not going to prove that they're wrong. You're going to say, okay, how can we fix this? Because, even if we are absolutely no doubt that what we are thinking is correct, if you listen to someone and have conversation with them, you might see that there's more to it than what you realized, and that they might be right too, because they have different sets of facts than you have. So, if you go for conflict resolution, the main thing is to stay open, to stay loving, to go to resolve, not to prove that you're right and that they're wrong, like I said. It says, most of us just want justice, especially if it's for the other person. But big girls know that God is the God of reconciliation. And that's true. If you're upset, that's the thing you have to be careful, is that you're not going in there because you want justice for what the other person did wrong. You want to go in because you want to resolve, you want to preserve a relationship, especially if you're dealing with a fellow Christian. And there are some people that you just can't resolve things with. But your goal should be reconciliation. It should not just be, okay, let's fix this situation and then go on and we never have to see each other again. The goal should be reconciliation. So, the prime rule of conflict resolution is to pursue peace. And Romans 12:18 says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. How easy is that? Not so very easy is what I'm thinking. Sometimes it's easy. A lot of times it's not easy, because we're dealing with other flawed people, and we forget sometimes that we are flawed people. Pursuing peace is an active process. It does not mean looking for peace at any price or ignoring the problem. It takes two people to resolve a conflict. It says a big girl knows that she can't make someone else want peace with her, and God knows that too. So the good news is that you're not responsible to bring peace to a situation where there is no cooperation. So that's the other thing to realize here. Just because you want peace and just because you want resolution, the other person, one, may not want it, or two, may not be ready. And that's something that you have to be sensitive to, is, just because you've gotten to the point that you're like, okay, let's deal with this, let's settle it, doesn't always mean the other person's there, or they may never get there. And you have to realize that you can't force them to. You're just, again, we said this early on, you're responsible for you. And this is one of those situations for sure that definitely holds up. It says, not everyone that is broken can be fixed. And that's huge to keep that in mind. It says everything. I said everyone. Not everything that is broken can be fixed. Big girls know that and are willing to leave some situations unresolved when they have done all that they can. And that's the main thing, is do what you can, and then the pressure's off. And you can't just be like, oh, okay, I tried. And then when they come back and try to fix it, you're like, no, already tried. Already let go of that. It's not talking about that. It's saying do what you're supposed to do. Do what you feel comfortable that God wants you to do. And then move on. And if they come back later and they're ready, then be open and give them a chance. The next advice that she has is head off conflict before it starts. And this is one of those, be proactive. Don't be overly sensitive, and don't allow conflict to be because of you. And that's kind of what I alluded to earlier, when we first started tonight, was, make sure it really is a conflict. Make sure it's not something that you've stirred up. If you don't cause conflict, like if you don't knowingly cause conflict, then you're going to have a lot less conflict to resolve. And she brings out a good point too. She says, sometimes it helps to sleep on things before you get into it. She said, I'm always amazed at how different things look in the morning. And that's true. You know, a lot of times, you know, when I'm thinking through a situation, it's like the later at night that it gets, the more frustrated or the more worked up or whatever I can get on the inside. And then the next morning, you know, after I've had rest, after I've had that separation, I kind of look back and I'm like, that wasn't really that big a deal. I wish I hadn't wasted my energy and my effort on getting worked up about it. So, you know, make sure that there really is conflict. Make sure that how you want to handle things so that you don't react out of emotion. I'm all for not putting things off, but I do want you to wait until you're ready so that you're speaking out of wisdom, you're speaking purposely, as opposed to speaking out of anger or tiredness or emotion. So the next thing that we should do as big girls is ask God for wisdom. And that one's just pretty simple. And, you know, hopefully we're doing that in a lot of areas of our life. And, you know, James 1 talks about if any of you ask wisdom, if any of you lacks wisdom, ask God and he'll provide it liberally and without reproach. That means he'll give you the wisdom that you need and he's not going to take it back, basically. He's not going to make you confused by it. He's not going to just give you just a little bit. God will give you all the wisdom that you're willing to handle, that you're willing to be open for. And that one's just pretty simple and straightforward. I won't stay on that one. The next thing that big girls do is seek to understand rather than to be understood. And this one's important and this one's tough because a lot of times if you're going into one of these situations, it's important to you and you have all these thoughts in your head and you have what you want to get across and things that you think are so brilliant that need to be, you know, brought out in the situation. But you're supposed to seek to understand rather than to be understood, which means you're going to have to actually stop and listen to the person that's in front of you. Don't, you know, while they're talking, think of your response or think of, okay, I don't want to forget to say this. This is important. I want to say this. Listen to the person because the things that you thought you needed to say may not be quite as important once you hear their perspective or once you hear their opinion of it, you know, their views. Maybe what you were doing was totally, you misunderstood maybe, you know, maybe you were totally off track. But if you'll take the time to listen, you'll see what the true conflict is. And that's what you address. And you don't go back and throw in all the stuff that you had prepared, you know, for free just because, well, you know, I want to make sure you know this. They may not need to know this and it may not be applicable and you're just going to look foolish and it's going to be really hard for them to accept the resolution. So, next thing that a big girl does is speak the truth in love. And really, the whole gist of that, to me, is in love. You know, make sure, again, that you're not speaking to prove that you're right. You're not speaking to further your cause. You're speaking because you love someone. So make sure you use loving words. You use kind words. You don't use angry words. You don't use accusing words. And I like how she says, you know, maybe if you start off the conversation by saying, you know, or at least early in the conversation, say, you know, this is what I think happened, or this is the impression that I get, or this is how I think you felt, or by the way that you reacted, this is what I took from that. Am I right? You know, did I misread that? Did I miss something somewhere? So, you know, just letting the person know how you feel and what your interpretation of the situation is, and then give them the chance to say, you know, I didn't mean that at all. Because you might realize that the way you took something could be based on how you felt that day or something that you'd heard, or, you know, there are all kinds of things that can cloud how we interpret things. You know, and allow them to do the same thing. And make sure, too, that you're willing to admit that maybe you have contributed to the conflict that you're in. You know, it's not, we like to think that we're right and other people are wrong and, well, they just didn't see it all and they needed to see it from my side. But if you really want to resolve something, you need to make sure that you're willing to take responsibility for your part, too. And, you know, just realize, and even if you didn't do something wrong, but you didn't realize the background that they brought to the situation that made them feel or react or say the things that they did, if you're willing to listen to that, it might help you realize that what you're upset about or what's going on is not as big of a deal as you thought it was. You just have a different background, a different history that's been spoken into your life that has caused you to respond the way that you did. And I like this too. It says, during these times, always leave room for mercy. And that's something, I'm a rules person. I want people to follow the rules. That's part of why I am an angry driver sometimes. And I'm not a great driver, and my family will tell you that in a heartbeat. So I guess I'm really not a great driver. But it bothers me when people don't follow the rules, and even if they're trying to be friendly and, whatever, if it's not their turn, they're going to mess everything up. And so, or if they, anyway, those are my issues. But what I have to remember too is I'm going to mess up sometimes too. So always allow room for mercy in every situation, because if you give mercy enough, when you need it, someone's going to be willing to give it to you. It's just how things work. But if you're the person that is just, no, this is how it is. These are my views. This is what we're going to go with. You're wrong, I don't care. Then people are going to do that to you eventually. It's just the whole sowing and reaping thing. So, give what you want to get. Basically in life in general, give what you want to get. If you want people to treat you a certain way, treat people that certain way, and it will come back to you. Okay. Yeah, and I guess she gets a little deeper here into the whole, ask yourself, what part do I play in the problem? If there's a conflict, then you have a role in it, and that's something we have to realize. Your role may be a passive one, in which you do not do what you ought to do, or your contribution may be an unrealistic expectation. You may be looking for a behavior that it just isn't going to happen, and so then you end up disappointed, and then you realize you think that there's a conflict, when basically it's just because you put pressure on a situation based on your wants instead of how things just happened, and it may have been not a big deal at all. It says, or perhaps you are refusing to look at how you have enabled the behavior. And that's a big one. People stay frustrated with other people because they don't act the way they want them to, but then they realize that they've allowed it because they've either ignored the behavior or they have created the behavior in them, something that used to be cute. Perfect example. Matt, absolutely crazy about his baby sister, loved his baby sister. Like, she took a little bit longer to talk because she didn't have to talk. If she pointed, Matt was there. Matt did exactly what she wanted. Well, then when she's like 8 and he's 12 and she's like trying to boss him around the room, around the house, it totally was driving him nuts. And I'm like, you did this. You created this, because that's the relationship that you developed with her. Obviously, I didn't allow it to continue, and they worked it out, and they hated each other for a while, and now they're best friends again. But that's just, a simple example of sometimes we allow something because we can handle it, but then after a while we start resenting it. So make sure that you're not the enabler in the situation. The next thing is to create a crisis as a path to peace. And this one's kind of tough. This is when you have a situation where there's, the elephant in the room, or a behavior that's not okay, but everyone allows it because they don't want to deal with confronting it. And they tell a story basically about a family that the parents were very critical. They were critical to the 2 girls, but then it got passed down to the grandkids. And the sister, not the one with the kids, but the aunt, realized that, that behavior was repeating, that cycle of just keeping people down and being critical and not positive. And so she finally had to just fly home and say, hey, we need to talk. And she just finally addressed it, the thing that nobody would ever talk about. And at the end of the conversation, she told them, when you call me, when we talk, whatever, as long as things are positive, as long as we're being rational, basically as long as we're being nice to each other, we'll continue to talk. But if you start turning things, or you start being critical, or you start being ugly, basically, I'm just going to, just know that I'm going to say, hey, I love you, but the conversation's not going the way that it needs to be healthy, and I'm just going to go ahead and get off the phone, and then we'll try again later. So, she created conflict to try to solve a conflict. And that one's tough, and that's one that you need to make sure that you're not doing it just to make yourself feel better, about telling someone what's wrong with them, basically. But there may be a situation where you do have to do it. And one thing that she, I circled the word in here, graciously. Don't do it to go in there to, you hurt me and you did this, and, you scarred me because of this and that. but go with grace and maybe realize that the way that they are is how they were taught to act. You're just going to have to break that cycle, with your family and whatever. And, it says too, to make sure that you've prayed about it and you have people praying for you and you have talked to whoever needs to be talked to. Make sure not to bring people in the situation that don't need to know anything about it. But just know that when you do this, it could backfire on you too initially. But if it's something that you feel so strongly about, then pray, be prepared, and go in there in love. And then the last thing that we're going to address is, what if you can't resolve the conflict? Life goes on. You do what you can do. You can't control the other person. You do what's right. You show love. You show grace. You maybe confront things that are not okay, but you do it in a positive way, and then life goes on. It says, if you have done all that you know to do to bring a resolution, and it has failed, then you have to resolve things within yourself. It's important not to let the poor me or guilty me or self-pity bog you down. As far as it depends on you is as far as you can go. And that's what the scripture that we talked about earlier, as far as it depends on you, pursue peace with everyone. So as far as it depends on you, first of all, let you off the hook of bringing the other person in. But God knew that some people just are not going to resolve things, or are not going to resolve things when you want to. It says, make sure you have made an honest effort to resolve the conflict. Don't use this as a cop-out and say, oh, well, I tried. If you really tried, great. If you didn't try, then try. If you're willing to be flexible and reasonable, there's a good chance that you will come to agreeable terms. And again, that's just the whole, don't go in there with your mind made up of how things have to happen or how things have to be resolved. Go in with, I want to resolve this, and just go with an open mind, listen, and be flexible if you need to. It says you can do everything in your power to resolve a problem, but if the other person doesn't want it resolved, it's not going to happen. Just know that, and be willing to accept that that might be one of the options, one of the outcomes. Praying for God to bless the other person is a real big girl thing to do. Ask Him to meet every need in her life and to draw her close to Himself. This prayer may merely be an action without desire at first, but when you do it, you will find yourself really meaning what you say. And, there's a reason that God tells us to pray for our enemies. And it may not be someone that you would classify as an enemy, but it's someone that's an enemy to your peace. And so pray for the person. And like she admitted it, I'm going to admit it. It's not always easy. Be willing to do it, and eventually, basically when I do that, I'm like, and God, help me to love them the way that you love them, because He loves unconditionally. And it doesn't mean that you're okay with how they act, you're okay with everything that they do, but you still have to realize that God died for them just like He died for you. You're not any better or any more important than they are. So you can't feel good about yourself about, oh, well, I tried and they wouldn't, and so, they have issues and they have problems. No. They need God to move on their behalf too. They need to listen to God they need God, just like you need God. So, keep that in mind. And forgive the person. Forgiveness doesn't let them off the hook, but it unhooks you from the situation. I love how she says that. And the choice is yours. Basically, you do what you're supposed to do, and then you realize that you're going to live with it. And she points out, too, the last thing is, through the cross, the conflict between man and God was resolved. If God went to such extreme measures to resolve our conflict with Him, how much more should we be determined that we will be committed to conflict resolution? And I'd never really thought about that. God wanted us in peaceful relationship with Him so strongly that He sent His Son to die for us. And if He felt that strongly about it, we can't continue to live in conflict. We have to address things that need to be addressed. Like I said, don't make something that's not there, but we need to do our part and we need to show love. So, anyway, big girls facing conflict. Next week, we will talk about how to handle crisis once you're in the crisis. So, do you guys have any questions? Or I didn't go super long tonight. I'm very excited for that. But if you do, just send me a message and we'll address it, or we'll talk, or whatever we need to do. Just want to remind you that Saturday night is when we're going to have our launch or meeting to figure out about our launch. So if you're interested in that, send us a message and we'll let you know how to get with us. And we have enjoyed our time with you guys so far, and hope you're having a great rest of the week. Love you guys. Rest of the week. Bye.